of the Dark Ages. They were very dark indeed. As you will recall, a ferocious plague had decimated the population of Europe and other parts of the world as well. And all of the learning and the technological advances of ancient Greece and Rome had been forgotten. All of learning was relegated to monasteries, and only very few people could read. There weren't that many books to read, as every book had to be made by hand. Half the population has been decimated, and yeah, it is a very dark time. But from the darkness comes the light. And the Renaissance, which is a period starting around 1400 and going to 1600, the Renaissance, which means literally rebirth, was just that. It was a rebirth of ideas, philosophies, science, arts that had been developed during the classical period of Greece and Rome, but had been lost to the Dark Ages. It was a huge upheaval culturally, politically, economically, artistically, in every way you can imagine. The predominant way of living for people in the Middle Ages was hierarchical, and they believed in obedience. They believed that the church was supreme. The head of the church was the Pope, who was infallible. They believed that if you were born to a position of authority as a lord or a king, that's because God wanted you there. So disobedience was really not encouraged. It was not tolerated. In the Renaissance, people began to question this hierarchy as new ideas, actually, and some old ideas, were introduced to a broader group of people. Humanism was what they called this way of thinking, as opposed to the Dark Ages way of thinking that humans are innately sinful and evil. The humanist philosophy posits that humans are made in God's own image. Therefore, they are sacred creatures. Man himself is the center of the universe. It's a radical departure from the way people thought in the Middle Ages. One of the ways these ideas got spread was through the Gutenberg press, which was a printing press invented in 1450, and it enabled you to make multiple copies of books or writings or pamphlets or ideas. So instead of ideas just being shared by a few people, few elite, they could be disseminated, as far and wide as possible. So it led to this upheaval. It was an upheaval culturally, artistically, politically, economically, in every way you can imagine. Being able to spread ideas changed the world. Throughout the Renaissance, society began to be more prosperous, with a strong middle class. That was something that hadn't existed in the Middle Ages, where you had, as a middle class developed, this creates more prosperity. Humanists are rediscovering Greek and Roman thought and art and literature and science and philosophy. And the Renaissance initiates a heat period of global exploration like we've never seen before. Used to be believed in the Middle Ages that the world was flat, and that if you went too far in your boat, you'd fall right off of it. Now, as we know that from the childhood poem in 1492, Columbus, who was a Spaniard, sailed the ocean blue and discovered what is now America, the New World. Meanwhile, Magellan and Vasco da Gama found sea routes to China and Japan. The center of the world was man, and man made in God's image. So why not? Not innately sinful, as they believed man was in the Middle Ages, but innately glorious. Women, although true equality is still several centuries away, women had much more power and freedom. Some of them became respected writers and thinkers, and even queens. Clothing was rich and opulent and layered for both men and women. Textiles became much more varied and interesting. As you remember, there was mostly wool and fur, maybe a little velvet, in the Middle Ages for the upper classes. With the new trade routes to China and Japan and India, new fabrics could be brought. The silk from China, and silk was all the rage. So we have this beautiful silk brocade dress here. Jewelry was elaborate and artistic and usually gold, although pearls were extremely popular as well. There was not so much bathing. People were fearful of bathing. They thought that if you bathed too much, you would get sick. In fact, some people only believed you should be bathed twice in your life, once when you were born, the night before you got married. I'm sure that your spouse was grateful for that. And we can see the advent of a lot of perfumes and colognes in the cologne industry. The Renaissance was a time of real splendor. And you'll see that as the period progresses, it gets more and more lavish, luxurious, and opulent. From the Dark Ages to the High Renaissance, you see a really distinct change in silhouette. Look at these slender, narrow silhouettes on these ladies from the Dark Ages. And the Renaissance encouraged a more wide, soft, easy, natural silhouette. Italy was the center of the Renaissance. Italian fashion at that time set the standard for fashion for the world. One of the things you'll notice, typical Italian looking silhouette, is this high-waisted dress, which is worn over a little underdress. You can see this white dress underneath. That was for cleanliness. That was called your chemise or camisa, and it would be laundered daily. This is a great beauty of the time, a courtesan, which is sort of a high-class prostitute. And you can see that she has this high waist, but very expansive silhouette across the top. There was a huge craze for tie-on sleeves, which seems like a really actually practical idea. You got so this lady here, this lovely young lady, we know she is a young lady because her hair is loose, which means that she's unmarried. She has her camisa on underneath her dress, and she has tie-on sleeves in 2 parts. So she can change up her outfit by changing up her sleeves. She probably had several different kinds of sleeves and sets. This one is also a 2-part sleeve, but look at this little slashes here to allow the chemise to show through. You'll find as you look through these slides that velvet and lacing was an integral part of the Italian Renaissance look. But there's a very particular color palette as we move through the early to high Renaissance, which is the 1500s. A lot of russets, orange, green, muted sort of fall tones. Menswear also was very layered, very elaborate. Look at this beautiful color-blocked tie-on sleeve. He's wearing his little white chemise under there, his fur, his hat, or this gentleman with his gorgeous striped hose. How lovely. And layers of brocade. Men, for the most part, wore some variation of the doublet and hose. As we go back to this one, you can see this gentleman's doublet is a little bit longer. This one is quite long, almost down to his knees. But many young men would wear a doublet, this is the jacket, would wear it really short, like just to the waist, so that they could show off their legs in their hosen. And it was considered a mark of virility and manliness to have shapely legs. Another trend was for blackwork, which is this detailed little black embroidery on the chemise or camisa for both men and women. Also, like, look at this gentleman's like fancy hat, his beautiful velvet cloak, her fancy hat, and her jewelry, and her very wide silhouette, these wide sleeves. There was a craze for slashing as a way of decorating your garments. So you can see this lady on the left. She has tie-on sleeves that are sort of bigger and baggier on the top and then narrow on the bottom. But look at all the slashing. And what you do is, these would be slashes that you then pull your white chemise through for this lovely little like white puff effect. Again, we see examples of the wideness of the silhouette, particularly throughout the arms and shoulders for both men and women. And this gentleman's wearing, he's got the black work chemise on underneath there as well. Long hair was popular for both men and women, although once a man got to a certain age, he would cut his hair and grow a beard. But you can see long flowing locks were very popular, and elaborate hair dressings with pearls and fake hair and braids woven into it. As the Renaissance goes on, and we're now in the late 1500s, mid to late 1500s, you'll start noticing a little more structure appearing in the garments, as opposed to the softness of the early Italian Renaissance. Looked so comfortable. We'll see a gradual tightening of the silhouette throughout the period until it achieves an extreme tightness in the Elizabethan era. Velvet was the fabric, velvet and again you see this rusty color palette, the cranberries and oranges that we've come to associate with the Renaissance. And these paintings were probably made, much like the one that we saw in the Dark Ages, were probably made to send to a faraway suitor in order to arrange their marriage. As the Renaissance moves on through the 1500s and into the 1600s, the age of exploration begins. And once he realized that the earth was not flat and that there were in fact other lands to be found if one sailed far enough, that became one of the most sort of important opening new trade routes. These new men in the new world, you can see that they brought back plenty of beautiful, luxurious items. They have instruments of navigation up here, and here they have lute and beautiful velvet, and this globe here, this globe, which indicates a round world. As we approach the end of the Renaissance, you can see that this sort of casual and soft silhouette stiffens for both men and women. Men's doublets become tight and padded, and they're actually wearing almost a corset underneath it, and padded hips. The ruff becomes essentially the necktie of the period for both men and women. It was made of starched lace, and it could not have been comfortable. There's Henry VIII, and you can see how incredibly grand and formal his clothing has become. Here we have some other examples of gentlemen and royalty and nobles of the time, and you can see how incredibly elaborate, increasingly elaborate, everything that they're getting is wearing. Look at those little shoes with the big rosette and the embroidered socks. And now you see that the hosen is only knee-high now, and these puffy pantaloons are worn with the doublet. And his gorgeous embroidery on every single piece. This guy's he's got his velvet robe, I believe he was, and again, his little rosette and his high-heeled shoes. As we move into the Elizabethan era, at the end of Henry VIII's reign, his much bloodshed and war, his daughter Elizabeth ascends to the throne and brings about the Elizabethan era, which is sort of the tail end of the Renaissance. You can see that the structure of garments and the elaborate ornamentation at this point has gotten more and more extremes, and fashion will always do that. Fashion will go to its furthest extreme. It will get as extreme as possible before it then turns around and goes back in the other direction. So we're seeing that things are getting more and more formal, more and more elaborate, more and more luxurious as the period goes on. I mean, she's got jewelry everywhere on her, until we finally achieve a rather incredibly stiff, incredibly formal, incredibly covered with decoration and embroidery and everything you can throw on an outfit. And a very strange shape starting to emerge here with the farthingale skirt. The waists are getting restricted into a more and more unnatural shape. That'll be the case throughout the end of the Renaissance, the Elizabethan era, and into the beginning of the next period, which is the Baroque and Rococo. We shall leave the Elizabethan era with by appreciating the majesty of this incredible portrait of Queen Elizabeth. In this portrait, she has real jewels and real pearls sewed to every single bit of her garments. She's got the crown of her empire to the left over here, and through the window, you can see what? The ships of her armada. These are the ships with which she will trade, and with which she will make war with other countries fighting over trade routes. As you can see, you've got the picture of her armada here, And then you've got these ships that are being dashed on the rocks on this other painting. That is what will happen to the enemies of Elizabeth. That's the the Renaissance through the Elizabethan era in a nutshell. Fashions reflect the values of the time. So when the values of the time are more human-centered, the fashions become more comfortable, more easy, more natural looking. And then as we go through the Renaissance, we get into this authoritarian period of Elizabeth and the Age of Exploration, you find that garments become more and more formal to emphasize their authority. In the case of Elizabeth as a queen, ruling a country with no husband, it was really important for her to protect her authority in every way possible. And that included her behavior, but more importantly, every element of her dress, hairstyling, and makeup. We'll talk more about it.